Donovan, thank you so very much, and good morning, everyone. When Sarah asked me to be a participant in this gathering, I said, what, Sarah, should I speak about? And she said, well, speak about 17 minutes. Actually, she didn't. She said, speak exactly for 17 minutes. So, Owsley and Sarah, thank you. Thank you for your wonderful welcome. You know, it's a privilege to reflect with you. And I wanted to begin with a phrase that all of us were asked to reflect on too, and that is a quote from Thomas Merton. Let me read it. It's a brief sentence. The peace produced by grace is a spiritual stability too deep for violence. It is unshakable. And so that relationship of peace to nonviolence. Our Holy Father, as Donovan mentioned, Pope Francis came to the United States last September. And one of the highlights, I thought, of his trip was his being invited to give a talk to the joint meeting of Congress. And when he did so, among the American icons that he mentioned, actually one of them was Thomas Merton. And here's what he said about him. He said, Merton was above all a man of prayer, a thinker who challenged the certitudes of his time and opened new horizons for souls and for the church. He was also a man of dialogue, a promoter of peace between peoples and religion. I've tried to get to Gethsemane myself on a monthly basis. I've been less successful this past year, but nevertheless, I keep trying. And in many ways seek to make that spirit also part of my own daily life. I have 5 areas that I'd like to talk about, obviously within 17 minutes. Without losing my serenity, let me see if I can do that. The first is a very simple thing. As I look at the richness of Catholic thought, belief, and faith, which I'll try to concentrate on in this brief time, the first comes from the quote, "Peace is produced by grace." We may be tempted to think that peace is a discipline that we earn. And yet, it would be better to say as we look at centering our lives in a sense of calm in the midst of the turmoil that surrounds us and often occupies our inner thinking and feeling, it's not simply a discipline. It is rather a gift that we beseech God to give us, that we ask could be received into our hearts, and that we will cherish. It's no accident that for a Catholic, Jesus, after the resurrection, came on that first Easter night and said to his disciples, "Peace, shalom, be with you." And then to make it clear that it is a gift to be received, we're told in Scripture that he breathed on them. And so that notion of gift, the word itself, grace, gratia, free, gift, all connotes that. Now, secondly, I'm already on the second of 5 points. That doesn't mean that peace is not an act of virtue. And it doesn't mean that nonviolence is a passive shunning of the world. I'm reminded that the anthropologist Margaret Mead, when she was asked supposedly by a student, what is the earliest sign of civilization in any given culture? She did not say, as you and I may have expected, well, it's this particular tool or this weapon or even this shard of a pottery. Here's what she said. She said it is the first found example of a healed femur bone. The femur, as you know, is that long bone in our leg that connects the hip to the knee. And the healed bone was a sign that someone had to help another. It was the first sign that she could find in her studies of a genuine act of compassion. And so we have this notion of peace and nonviolence not being passive, but rather being an active reaching out. And so we might ask, thirdly, what is the place of violence? Jesus very clearly says in the Gospels for us, blessed are the peacemakers. I recall that as he was taken to his death, a very cruel death, he admonished Peter, put away the sword, he said. And so very clearly, it is certainly Catholic thought that the cycle of violence begets further violence. The Universal Catechism of our Catholic Church, it was put out in 1990, and lest you think, well, they probably put one of these out every year or two. The last Universal Catechism of the Catholic Church before that, I think, was put out around 1580. So this does not happen very, very often. But it's a summary. It's an attempt to bring together teaching. And there's an interesting thing that was mentioned before any talk is mentioned, which I'll mention a little bit about what's been called the just war theory. There's in number 2306, that means there's 2,305 paragraphs before that. It's not a short document. Here's what it says. Those who renounce violence and bloodshed, and in order to safeguard human rights, make use of those means of defense available to the weakest, bear witness to evangelical charity, provided they do so without harming the rights and obligations of other people and societies. And so, and this is my fourth point, while we cannot say that the Catholic Church in its official teaching could be called a pacifist church, we can say that there is a growing awareness, I think, in each of our hearts, and certainly in our teaching, that violence begets violence. The background for what has, I think, been misnamed the just war theory really would more properly be called restraint in taking action to defend the innocent. Restraint. It began for us around the time of Augustine in the 4th century, drawing on much of the history of Roman law and customs. It's said that, as Augustine is said to have said, if it comes to my defending myself, I will follow the way of Jesus. He said, though, if it comes to defending someone innocently attacked, I must understand what restraints there are. This is something we've been reflecting on and doing our best to come up with a great direction now for a good 16 centuries. And as we've done so, the teaching says that if there is a justified reason, and it can only be of last resort to defend an innocent person being attacked, we must always choose the least aggressive approach. We must always avoid the taking of civilian life. This theory in itself is also coming under great scrutiny, and partly because, if not all, of the reality of what we might call the nuclear no-win situation that our world finds itself in. So I reflect on that in order to give an overview of Catholic thought and also the direction that is developing in Catholic thought. I come now to point 5. In case you're counting, it's the last one. And perhaps it is the one that touches each of our hearts. It touches my heart. You and I are responsible to promote peace. You and I are responsible to promote peace not only in our own hearts, to cultivate that peace, but also with one another as neighbor. So we hear the theme of how do I love my neighbor, and as nation upon nation. And in that effort, the key in Catholic social teaching is the understanding of human dignity. That every person is endowed with great human dignity. And that dignity is both a gift and a task. It is a gift. One does not earn dignity. We believe that created in God's image and likeness, every person has that dignity. But it's also a task, and let me explain how I know it, because my mother taught me this. It wasn't often that I did the wrong thing growing up, at least I'm not going to publicly admit that. But every once in a while I would. And my mother would say something to me that as soon as she said it, it was very, very clear. She said to me, "What you just did was beneath your dignity." What you just did was beneath your dignity. You and I, if we are to be peacemakers who are nonviolent, cannot simply seek to remove ourselves from the world, but rather to seek to impart in everyone whom we meet that great gift of dignity, and to understand that you and I, as responsible individuals, need to accompany and enter into dialogue with other people, people who believe as we do and people who do not. Pope Francis has walked a path of nonviolence, and he's done it by calling us not to flee from others, but rather to accompany others and to enter into dialogue. Thankfully, this dialogue promotes both. Thank you.